Okay, we're going to kind of wrap up today with our last panel at Quad A. And the topic today is going to be on modeling and simulation. We put a panel together to kind of tell you what is happening in the Army Aviation, especially more from a collective standpoint, virtual standpoint. And we put a panel together to kind of run you through that today. And I'm your monitor. I'm Jan Drabczuk. I'm also the VP for chapters at Quad A. And so our panel, what we're going to do is I'm going to let the panel introduce themselves, tell you a little bit where they're from, what their area of expertise is. And then I've put together about half a dozen questions to kind of get the panel moving in some topic areas. And then we'll try to get the last 20 minutes or so for questions and answers from the audience. We're scheduled to go to 4:45. Exhibit hall closes at 5. So if the lights go out, the panel's still here. Somebody needs to bring them some beer. So we'll be done at 5 o'clock for sure. So, okay, so I'm going to start off here with Colonel Haggerty.
Yeah, I'm Rich Haggerty. I'm a project manager at a PEO STRI, Orlando. Part of my portfolio, which Lieutenant Colonel Al Niles in the back runs, is our SOF, modeling and simulation. It actually goes broader than just aviation, but for purposes today, I'll talk a little bit about that. Real quickly, what our enterprise consists of is 5 high-fidelity, full-motion combat mission simulators, replicating the 3 airframes in the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment. In addition to the 5 flying boxes, we also have, obviously, the package that wraps it, all of the mission rehearsals, safety investigation, and everything that enables the other training capabilities. About 5 or 6 years ago, as a team, we embarked on a pretty aggressive strategy. We wanted to shift from a simulated technical baseline where all of the activities in the flight simulators were basically coded, it was all software, to a more stimulated approach where we would actually use black boxes, line replaceable units, controls, and some of the actual software going in and out of aircraft. So this transition to make those 5 flight simulators actual tail numbers and get them commensurate with that, it's been about 5.5 years in the making, and I'm proud to say this August we'll actually finish that up with the 5th simulator coming online and everything on the same technical baseline for the first time ever in the history of soft simulation at the regiment. So with that, I'll hand it off to Marcus.
Good afternoon, Colonel Marcus Vonador. I'm the project manager for the integrated training environment. So our mission is to provide relevant integrated modeling and simulation capability to the warfighter to help them improve their readiness. Things that you would be interested in that are part of the portfolio from an aviation perspective. I manage the aviation, AVCAT, Aviation Combined, Combined Armed Tactical Trainer. Thank you, Rich. As well as the Flight School 21 systems that are at Fort Rucker to allow the aviators to go through the training there at Fort Rucker. In addition to that, you'll probably hear a lot about the synthetic training environment. That is also under my portfolio and will be a program of record for us, and that is bringing all of the systems to really the future of the synthetic training environment. Within my portfolio, we're responsible for virtual, collective, and gaming, and we tie that in with the live portfolio as well. So I'm sure we'll get more into those discussions with the question and answer session. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Colonel John Farrell. I'm Director of Simulations at Fort Rucker for Army Aviation. Being the only branch that has a Director of Simulations, I have a lot of hats. One of those is I support all the training that goes on, all the simulation training that goes on Fort Rucker for students that come through all the classroom education, initial entry training, as well as some of our professional military education. So we run exercises, but we also run all the simulators for the flight school. So the Flight School 21 teams here up front, they work with me, and we're the ones that provide those simulation services for all the students that go through the flight school at Fort Rucker. Right now, we're looking at around 40% total flight hours in the initial entry classes are in simulation. So that's a big leap from where we were about 10, 15 years ago. So it's a big, important, big investment for Fort Rucker. So some other hats that I wear. Part of my job is to provide guidance and advice to General Gaylor, CG at Rucker, on what we're doing with simulations now, how we make simulations better with the stuff we have. But we're also providing advice on what the future simulations are going to hold. So I work closely with Marcus and some other folks on the TICM side up at Fort Leavenworth to make sure they understand what aviation requirements are as we move to the STI, and also what aviation equities that lie in some of those other constructive sims such as War Sim and things like that. So we provide a lot of those requirements up. So the other hat I wear is I'm actually the accreditation authority for all the aviation simulations around the world. So I have teams of guys that go out and they make sure that all the simulators that are fielded whenever they're upgraded or every few years meet the training needs of the units that are using them. So with that, I'm gonna hand it off, and we'll get to your questions. Thanks.
Good afternoon, Lieutenant Colonel Ed Weekly. I'm the STI project lead for the cross-functional team. And so in my previous job, I was a product manager for MCTS, which had AVCAT and Flight School 21. So my role on the cross-functional team is to provide the acquisition management as we develop the future requirements for the synthetic training environment. And additionally, so not only do I advise the director in terms of the writing of the requirement, but as we do these OTAs and other experiments, my team manages the cost schedule performance of those activities. So that's my function. And again, as we move to the future synthetic training environment, I'll be an integral part as we eventually move this into a program of record over under Colonel Barnador.
Good afternoon. My name is Robert Abascal. I'm founder and CEO of ABT Simulation. We're a small business located in Orlando, Florida, specializing in simulation. We just celebrated our 20th year last week, as a matter of fact. So at ABT Simulation, we make old simulators new and the new ones to deliver training for less. So old simulators new, legacy training systems. Back when I had much darker hair than I do now, the Army had a concept to start the collective training. That was probably 20 years ago, as a matter of fact. So you can imagine keeping your 20-year-old car running after all these days, and especially with computer technology, that Moore's Law, that's changing quite rapidly. So there's a lot of upgrades in the life cycle once our big brothers at Lockheed or L3 or CAE and those big guys deliver that training system to the Army. We get the opportunity to fix those things for the next 20 years to make it right for the Army. I'm kidding, Ken. So that's making old simulators new. As far as legacy training systems, we support the U.S. Army's collective close combat tactical trainer, which are all the ground collective training, and it's quite an enterprise all over the United States and all over the world, training our ground units. But we're also doing, in the last 5 years, the concurrency upgrades for all the aviation assets in the AVCAT portfolio. So we've been on the clock for 5 years. After the OEM, we've upgraded all of the helicopters. We're currently upgrading the Apache Echo model. So if you hadn't had the opportunity, if you remember the AVCAT of old, this is not your grandfather's AVCAT. So next time you hear of the AVCAT, take some time, and quite a bit of effort has been put into that system to address the challenges that the Army faces now and going forward. So making new simulators for less. 20 years on, the cloud computing is coming. We are the horsepower and the processors are much smaller, so we can make the footprint of these simulators much smaller. So instead of the giant brick and mortar, what we're targeting is point of need. So the same capability in a smaller footprint at a lower price point to address throughput and then also point of need. So it's an exciting time for where the Army is at and what their modernization desires are to lead to the synthetic training environment. And I'm just really excited about where we're at now and what the future brings. So I'm just honored to be on this panel and would love to hear your questions about what you think the future should be.
All right, my name is Ken Bartlett. I work for Lockheed Martin. I've been working with Lockheed Martin for about 9 years now. Retired Army aviator, 28 years in service. I transitioned probably the last 8 years of my career into the modeling and simulation FA-57 community. So I got a chance to not only fly, but also get the appreciation for modeling and simulation. Some of the major things that I do for Lockheed Martin, I work again in the training line of business, training and logistics solutions out of Orlando. Some of our major programs are Gelictic, if you're familiar with Gelictic. We just won the Army TADS maintenance program opportunity. So you're going to be seeing us out in the field with a lot of your technical capabilities to be maintained. And some of the major ranges like the DIRTS range and the Urban Ops training ranges, we are obviously the prime contractor on that. So a full line of live, virtual, and constructive training capabilities comes out of training and logistics solutions, and we try to bring that to bear to help the warfighter move forward with their requirements and capabilities. So.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen. You can look on your app that you have, and you can see a more detailed bio on the gentleman. We did have a couple changes due to some family emergencies, and Ken Bartlett is honored to have his 6 hours notice to come up here. So we appreciate you getting up here also, Ken. All right, so I'd like to kind of just start off with, and whoever really wants to take the question, kind of like to set the stage of where you guys feel our present collective, and maybe even define what collective is, of our present collective capability in the Army is today, and then we can follow into where that's going to grow and where that's going. So I assume Marcus is probably the lead one for you. So.
All right. So and I won't speak for Das. I'll let him chime in here, but looking holistically across my portfolio with the integrated training environment, with the ability for AFCAT and CCTT to be co-located in a simulation like Gelictic, the Joint Land Component Constructive Capability, where you have commanders and their staffs training, and for each of those elements to be able to see one another on the same battlefield and interact with one another through LVCIA, Live Virtual Constructive Integrating Architecture. That is a very good collective capability that allows the soldiers and the commanders to actually get that collective training. So that's looking at it from a higher level. I'm sure that Das has a point of view based on the actual collective training that he's seen with the operational units.
Okay, so like I mentioned before, one of my roles is the accreditation authority for all the aviation simulators around the world, and that includes the AVCAT. So last summer we ran an accreditation event where we ran the AVCAT through its paces for a week, running various mission scenarios to determine its capability to support its task, which is to conduct collective training tasks with aviators. It's important to note that AVCAT is not a flight trainer, so we don't evaluate it as such. We make sure that the pilots are able to do collective tasks, being able to move as a unit, talk to each other, talk to ground, and be able to shoot and engage enemy forces in the simulated terrain and database. So we worked very closely with PEO STRI over the last couple of years to get AVCAT to a really good level. The last load was pretty good, but they've made some major improvements this year, and so we look forward to accrediting them again this fall. So what we're going to do the next time, the last time we used SMEs from Fort Rucker. This fall we're going to do an accreditation event where we're going to put AVCAT through its same paces, almost the same scenarios to kind of do a comparison. But we're going to use actually trained and ready crews from 16th Cab. So we got actual unit providing support for that event. So I think we're going to get a lot more out of that. because we know the crews are good, and now we can evaluate the simulation for its ability to train those crews. But right now, I think AVCAT's pretty good. I'm excited about where it's going to be in the next couple years as we go through our last couple years of improvement. And hopefully a lot of the lessons learned over the last 15 years of AVCAT can be applied to the future on how we do collective training. And Jan, you brought up a good point, how do we define collective training? So, I mean, it's important with the complex aircraft that we have today that not only do pilots need to know how to fly their airplane, but they have to manage that airplane, they have to manage multiple airplanes. You have to bring in sensors that aren't on your platform and use those sensors with your systems. And you have to talk to the ground, both voice and digital. And you got to be able to talk to space assets and what other assets are out there. You heard General Gaylor talk this morning about the battlefield's a system of systems now. Everything's interlinked and related. And it's a very complex operating environment to operate in. So our simulations require high fidelity in being able to manage that. So from the collective side, like I said, we have flight training simulators to train individual tasks, and those are all really good high fidelity aviation training devices. But when it comes to collective training, you really got to focus your fidelity down to those collective tasks that need to be performed. Thanks.
Over in PEO STRI, the way the command is formed up, we have different PMs that are working the conventional simulation, then also the SOF. But I'd really like to get, if you can kind of, Rich, between you and Marcus, is talk about how the SOF part plays into this. I know there's commonality that you use. I know the SOF community always tries to take something that is fielded to the Army. But what is unique, and how do you guys interface, and what do you see the present and where you're going to on that area?
Sure, Jan. And I'll need a copy of this video where I knew the name of Marcus's program and he didn't. That's going to get a lot of airtime in the next year. So from a special operations and a conventional collaboration perspective, I'd say the tangible commonality that you can see is we do team with PM Cargo, so they have a similar hardware from an image generator and a database perspective. So we have partnered in the past and continue to partner on databases utilizing similar contracts, et cetera. With the Army as well. In fact, this month we're running a proof of concept where we're going to run an SE Core database through our compiler at the 160th to see if we can ingest and then execute training on an SE Core generated database. And then from just a general collaboration, I would say we have a lot of discussion internal to try to find ways to bridge or to converge SOF and conventional acquisition, but SOF and conventional simulation. Unfortunately, that usually tends to be challenging only because when you have two existing footprints that are dissimilar, trying to converge them when you don't have the same requirements, the same funding sources, the same timelines, it isn't as easy as it seems. But we certainly collaborate on an intellectual and programmatic level to see what efficiencies and lessons learned that we can apply to each other's programs. Truthfully, maybe unfortunately, from a SOF perspective, we're actually a lot more standardized and concurrent with a lot of Navy and Coast Guard efforts in, at least again, the databases, iOS, and image generators, just because of sharing that common hardware baseline, and the same vendor has really done a lot for our portfolio. The Navy especially has put forth a lot of funding into mapping a lot of the world, and then for almost no cost integrating it into our world terrain.
Colonel Farrell, really we are where we are now, and I know you're looking at, there's obvious shortfalls, and obviously funding is one of them as we go, but as far as requirements, where do you see the shortfalls today in our present devices that are going to lead you for either upgrading, AVCAT, or going to the future brand new systems and so forth? If you could maybe talk a little bit about that with some of the PMs also, chiming in if you guys want to.
Okay, in terms of priority of funding and stuff like that, I work very
You know,
closely.
more on technology, I think. Yeah. You know, for more
for
of
the
a
technology,
where
right.
you really feel where
Right,
the
but
shortfalls are.
When it comes to the priorities, so we talk the requirements at Rucker. We work with the TICM out of CACT since they own the requirements for collective training. But they pretty much use our inputs to validate those requirements. But we've provided a list of requirements, but we work closely with TICM ITE, Colonel Varnador, to make sure that our priorities can be met. And if they can't, then we negotiate what level of fidelity, what level of capability can we agree upon is good enough for the training objective. I mean, it all comes down to what are you trying to train and to what proficiency level you're trying to train in the simulator. So there's a lot of talk, some pilots don't like AVCAT because it's not as good as the aircraft. Well, anything that's not the aircraft won't be as good as the aircraft. That's just the way it is. So you have to compromise sometimes on fidelity within those devices. I think the biggest challenge with AVCAT, the current collective training device, is the concurrency issue. Making sure the simulator software capability matches what the aircraft software capability is. That's always a challenge because the aircraft are always upgrading, and by the time you engineer the training solution, the aircraft's moving on to the next version. So it's hard to keep up with that. It's like I said before, these are really complex airframes, and the operational flight programs that run those aircraft are extremely complicated as well. And trying to simulate that without running native OFP in the simulation is very difficult. So, I mean, I understand the challenge that PEO STRI has in developing this capability to the level we need, but at the same time, guys like me and the CG at Rucker have to say this is good enough. And so that's where we can start gaining capability in other areas. Now, there's lots of new technologies out there that I know they're employing into this AVCAT suite. I think the old AVCAT had like 200 computers in it, and now we've gone down to, what is it now, Rob? How many computers in the AVCAT now?
It's down to 21,
Yeah.
120.
Yeah, so they virtualize a lot of that stuff. So the computing power today is a lot better than what we had when our AVCAT was first designed. So that they've reduced a lot of hardware and virtualized a lot of that through software programs. So that's really helpful, and they're incorporating that right now. And hopefully in 2018 we'll meet a lot of those gates where we think AVCAT needs to be as we start looking to bridge AVCAT to the future STI environment.
Yeah, and part of the key for us in trying to buy down that risk is that the communication between us and DOS is paramount. If we're not talking and we don't have that communication back and forth on the technical challenges and looking at ways to overcome those challenges, it's just going to make the challenge that much greater. So we have an excellent working relationship at our level, certainly at the 06 level, and all the way down to the bottom, which has helped us be as successful as we have been, which is going to make us successful for version 18 and then the upcoming version 19 to get the warfighter what they need.
I do want to jump in. Colonel Farrell brought up the concurrency issue, and that's where I believe the simulator systems get a black eye, that the simulators are never concurrent with the aircraft. The aircraft's always changing, so that keeps us busy trying to keep the simulators concurrent. But here recently, the Army has gotten after data rights, so that concurrency isn't an issue, but they still exist, and there's still some gotchas. So when we get the simulator after the OFP's fielded, that's the aircraft's already getting them. We'll get them eventually through government purpose, through GFI, and then we have to spend a year and validate it on an entirely new system, which is not the helicopter. So that takes time, and then we have to push it out to the field, and then it has to go Army-wide, and then before you know it, that's 2 years late. The helicopter's now on the next version. And it's particularly compounded with the Apache that is continually changing, not as much as the other ones. But when you go from a Black Hawk L to an M, that's a big change, and the Chinook went from a Delta to a Foxtrot. That was a big change. So concurrency is a big issue, and that's where you get the black eye, because in aviation, negative training has huge consequences. So we all know that. The Army here, I mentioned data rights. PEO Aviation has really fought hard and long to acquire some of that, and as far as government purpose rights. But the other cooperation I see that has really benefited concurrency is the collaboration with Orlando and AMR Deck up in Huntsville. AMR Deck's doing the latest stuff, so that's really shortened the cycle as far as getting concurrency. There's still the lag, and there's ways to improve that, but it has greatly improved versus the old days of proprietary data rights. So I see that improving to shorten the length of the concurrency lag.
Yeah, and as most people know, in the simulation world, when you're talking individual flight simulators, most of those have followed down by the OEMs providing the simulators for the different airframes. And of course, PEO STRI mission was in place really to do a lot of that collective role, the environments and everything that ties in there. So where we're at right now is kind of a, like we said, just like the airframes, we're in a 20-year-old kind of model, still doing things, and now we're really going to be looking to the future. And one of the things that I know Colonel Weekly's been doing is part of the cross-functional teams that he's going to talk a little bit about. But before he does that, I'd kind of like to maybe talk from Ed, either from yourself or the gentleman from the industry, both small and large business. What is out there right now, if you look at the short term, that could really be put in the field, types of capabilities to kind of improve Army Aviation training right today?
Sure. So the way that we're approaching this problem to try to get after the aviation collective training piece of it is, first of all, from the holistic architecture, right? So you heard Colonel Varnador earlier mention the ITE that uses a system to connect everything together. So the vision of the STI is that is one system now. So it's a holistic system that you can then plug in whatever those capabilities are. One database, one train database, one simulation software, all of that's common across the architecture. So in the near term, right, we're still going to have a little bit of a challenge on how we try to figure out that concurrency piece, right, because a lot of that ties to the data rights problems that we have. So we're going to take the lessons learned out of AVCAT, and we're going to be looking for industry to help us solve those problems. And then in the longer term, we're going to look at how we, across the cross-functional teams, work with the other CFTs, FVL specifically, to look at how to fix it from a requirements standpoint, so that we don't have this problem where we're trying to buy something after the fact, that we address it up front, we identify the dependencies up front, and that we build that into the plan. So that way you could potentially be fielding, software to a simulator the same time you're pushing it out to the aircraft, and you can be training pilots before that aircraft even comes off the ground at a unit. So that's how, from the system, we're looking at it. From the specific technologies, I'll defer to Robert. He could probably talk that much better than I, because we're still in the early stages of doing market research. We just finished our first OTA effort, where Colonel Farrell's team came down and supported us to try to get an early look at what industry has to offer and how we evaluate that, how it might impact how we write our requirements, again, as Colonel Farrell talked about before. So I can't give you any specific examples of a specific technology that we're looking at right now, but I know Robert has some more to offer on that.
I have lots of ideas and suggestions, but we work with our government customer to try to come up with the best solutions. But Colonel Varnador mentioned just virtualization. Virtualization, you can imagine an enterprise like AVCAT or even CCTT to reduce the number of computers that are used throughout that industry. And of course, they're all different computers, so that's a configuration nightmare. When you virtualize that, you're reducing the hardware footprint and the operational costs and the maintenance and things that break. reliability, stability. Those are the things that are going to make these simulators useful once they're concurrent and once they actually develop the courseware to go through the simulators. So keeping the simulators running and active and high utilization or availability to use that is a huge, just dollars and costs. The simulators are going to be cheaper to operate and more available. Usability. These simulators are very, very complex. We're just talking about one computer. When you network 6 of them in an AVCAT site or network them in a Flight School 21 with tens of computers, and now you network them across the enterprise, that gets very complicated. Colonel Vazari, who does BD for us, talks about aircrew training exercises, how complicated those are to coordinate a live exercise. So here with the simulators, it's almost doing the same thing. So it's not as easy as it is to do one simulation training session for an individual crew. Now you have whole units, brigades, brigades that are doing these exercises. So it's a coordination effort. But if the simulator's not working, that kind of ruins the momentum of getting that training done. So those stability and reducing hardware footprint and usability, we have to make these simulators easy to use. You cannot be a computer scientist to figure out how to run these simulators. So the more we can make them video games, I see it at Rucker, I see these kids coming out, the future war fighters, they have been trained since they were little kids on working a video game, and they can pop it in there and get on the internet and play with somebody in Korea or wherever they're at. That's how easy we have to make this and how user-friendly. So those are things we can do right now to make the simulators more usable, but they're very complicated right now. The other thing that's a big push right now is cybersecurity. We used to get a pass in that the simulators wouldn't be networked to each other, so they weren't connected to anything, so we didn't have to worry about cybersecurity. That is no longer the case. So all these simulators all over the world will be connected, so cybersecurity is a big concern. So we're going through all that as we speak. All of those stability and usability issues would make the simulators more user acceptable to deliver the training that they need.
One of the things that I did want to let the audience know is, obviously we're in an aviation community, talked a lot about future vertical lift and the CFTs and that. Ed, can you kind of explain maybe a little bit more that concept of the mechanics of the CTC concept, how Steve fits into it? And I know Joe Genta was going to be here, who is the park for the Orlando Acquisition Center. And maybe you can maybe talk a little bit in his lane of contractually how that whole process works, as best you can, sir.
So I believe most everybody's familiar with the CFTs by now, about how we're organized and what we do. Specifically within the STI CFT, we have 4 main functions that we're going after right now in terms of capabilities. And that is the warm world terrain capability that I mentioned a minute ago, the training support software that runs that, and then we have the reconfigurable virtual trainers. So that includes the replacement for the AVCAT and the CCTT. And then the final piece of that whole is the whole architecture and the system, the backbone that supports that. And so from those capabilities, well, there's actually one more, this Soldier Squad virtual trainer. That's on the individual side of the house in the squad collective training. But from an aviation perspective, again, a reconfigurable virtual trainer. And so the CFT, again, as an organization, we have all the dedicated resources we need in order to exercise experimentation, do S&T type work to try to find that technology that can help inform the requirement, so that then we can present that to the users, get users in early, get user feedback early, so that we're making decisions faster on how we're going to write the requirement document. And then we're also informed from a technical perspective, and the program managers involved, so that we're able to then quickly get to a requirement document and get to a MDD, near simultaneously is the goal of the CFT, so that we get into production faster, and the end result is the user gets something that they can use much sooner. So from a contractual perspective, we're leveraging a lot of S&T work that our STTC partners do currently under SBIRS and all the other contract vehicles that they currently use. In addition, specifically, we're doing other transactional agreements to get after the capabilities that we need to see, get it in front of the user quickly, and then iterate on that multiple times to try to find exactly where that sweet spot is that Colonel Farrell mentioned in terms of what's good enough. And then once we understand that, then we can finalize that requirement document. But the OTAs is the primary vehicle that our CFT is using. Again, all different CFTs have different, they're in different places, looking at different things. But that vehicle is the one that works the best for us at this point in time. And we're doing both competitive through a kind of a little more traditional where you solicit out on FedBiz Ops. And then we're also using consortium as well. So we're doing it in both different venues.
Okay, yeah, and the kind of last question or subject I really want to get into before we can kind of get some questions from the audience is, we always ask that question. You got industry, you got government. So with where we're at right now, with whether it's the CFTs or the conventional contracting, it's a little discussion from both the industry and the government side of what works, what issues you guys having on the industry side with the government and the government with industry, so forth, that could try to maybe make the process a little better.
You want me to take this one? Sure. Yeah. So, a couple of things to think about. It kind of gets into the fidelity piece too a little bit that we talked about, but open architecture. My perspective comes from one of the programs that we use, and a lot of you may be familiar with this, and that's our Prepared program that we use for flight training. The genesis of Prepared came from Microsoft Flight Simulator that some of you have maybe used, from an entertainment standpoint at home and so forth. And in 2009, Lockheed Martin purchased Microsoft Flight Simulator. And Microsoft had really taken it about as far as they could in terms of a training platform. And we saw, a really good opportunity to, from an industry standpoint, to take the goodness of Microsoft Flight Sim and, for lack of a better term, militarize it, make it into a platform that we could use in our both our high-end simulators. I know we've worked with AVT, and we've been using Prepared in some of that effort, some of the effort with the STI, but we also can use it all the way down to desktop simulation, procedural simulators, even down to the experimentation level. So, that's one of the things that's been interesting for us. I think the other area that the future focus in terms of industry, I don't think we've really talked about it too much, is virtual reality, augmented reality, potentially mixed reality, with industry working with government. If we provide these open architectures where you can have, and this is kind of an interesting thing with Prepared, there's a tremendous ecosystem out there of users, whether it's guys working out of their garage developing their own training scenarios and flight training, flight training modules. I think it's important to leverage that, and I think DoD can leverage that, and the government can leverage a lot of that work to save a ton of money. So we work basically with over 100 different companies that have the Prepared program. We're able to roll out of that Prepared program capabilities for the government, and then the government can then utilize that and leverage that. I've got some notes. I wanted to mention a couple of things about, I mentioned open architecture, open development architectures, non-proprietary. That's an important area that we all need to keep in mind. Versatility of deployment as far as the the technology, being able to go from anywhere from a tablet all the way across to a desktop a desktop computer or a laptop. I think that's an important thing in terms of industry and government working together and kind of dictate what they should have on future opportunities and kind of dictate the rules that are out there. User-ready interoperability is another one. Working and taking a look at the best features that are out there in the DISC community, HLA community, some of the graphic image generators and so forth. So I think there's a lot of things that the government and industry can do to work together to kind of stipulate that, like I said, open architecture, non-proprietary, things that will advance and be able to bring in other third-party vendors that can add to that open architecture and provide a faster delivery and a cheaper delivery across the board.
I would add, it's an interesting time right now. Leavenworth had been briefing about this STE thing, this vision, not many details, just kind of rough areas about what it's going to look like, what it's going to be, and industry is just waiting and saying, okay, tell us the requirements. This is a different animal here in that they're asking us, they're asking everyone, what is the realm of possible? Here's what the Army needs in the future. Here's what the threat's going to be. Here's how we have to deliver training. And it's a big vision, and it's intentional that way. So listening to them, it's not the traditional way of developing requirements. It is a partnership, and they are willing to listen. So I cringe almost, and I've been tuned into what the STE is and what Leavenworth wants to do for the future of the Army and all this modernization, and things are developing quite rapidly here. And it's not ideal, but that's kind of the nature of the beast, the making of the sausage, so to speak. So it's an exciting opportunity, and everybody wants to know so they can report to their masters, how much money are we going to make? Can't tell you that, but you have to be a player to play into it. You are spending IRAD. I've been looking for where do we spend IRAD? What does the Army need? I think it's incumbent on us, and I see our friends here at CSRA and L3 and other contractors back here, Wayman with ECS, to attend these shows. This is not a training show. This is an aviation show. Or going to Rucker and talking to Colonel Farrell. Lonnie Hibbard was here with TRADOC, hearing what challenges the Army has, and us, the stewards and the keepers of this technology, to try to solve those problems. So that's, you can't just sit around and wait for requirements anymore. If you have a capability and you can solve a problem that the Army has, and that is constantly changing, so the problems today are not the problems next year or even 2 years from now. But the way the acquisition systems work, by the time they get a requirement out in the street and the protests and the awards and the development, it's 3 years down the road. So you have to make a system that's open and flexible and responsive. If you can get ahead of the game, sit in these sessions and listen to these guys here, but more importantly, listen to those guys that are about to go into harm's way and them coming back and, boy, we could have had this, we should have done that. If there's any way you can help, that's kind of what I live for. I like simulators. I love helicopters. So I love coming to this show and hearing those stories. And it's much different than a technology. It's not a technology show, frankly, but it's a need. These guys are going into combat and they're doing some crazy things. I'm seeing them. They're 19 years old. They're 20 years old coming out of school, wanting to fly the helicopter, and they're doing unbelievable, crazy things coming back. So if there's any way we can help them. So, God bless you for being here and listening to the PMs. We hear the briefings, and thank you, Army, for sharing that. The challenges of fielding the new Apache or the Black Hawk or whatever it might be, a new weapon system, sensors, whatever it might be. If there's a way we can help prepare our guys to do what they got to do and come back with simulation, then I think we're on the right track. But you get that by talking to these folks and listening to what the challenges are and how you can help solve their problems.
Jan, I've got a follow-up, if I could, just a alibi on some of the ideas of how the government can work with industry and we can all be more effective. I think, and Ben in the audience, you and I were talking about this earlier, if the government can work with industry and focus on the outcome of what they want, rather than getting bogged down with the functionality of training and the capability of the training, I think that's huge. And the other thing that I would mention, you know, in the prepared piece, just as a data point, because we work with it all the time, there's a ton of you know, experimentation going on out in the civilian sector right now, non-DoD, things that we can leverage from the commercial sector, non-DoD commercial sector, that we could bring back in, the government could leverage, they could save tons of money, and I think that that's something that would be, you know, more of a novel approach to reduce cost of fielding, reduce time of delivery, and you know, really work, I said, with like in the ecosystem and in the user community at large. So, yeah.
And back to my point about the STI, looking for the government to tell you what to do, that I don't think that's going to happen, and that's by intention. So you mentioned like the gaming world. We're looking, I was just in Best Buy and I saw augmented reality for $139, but you can play for Star Wars. So guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to go buy that. If it works, then great, but we constantly have to do that because they want to see augmented reality. With augmented reality, you can be more immersive, you can reduce the footprint, and it's, like I said before, we're targeting point of need. Augmented reality is not there yet, but I'm starting to see the signs that it's coming here. And when it does come, it'll be adapted so quickly. I do want to mention one last thing about the STI. I have seen that the STI is gathering momentum. There's a STI train coming down the track, and I think it's picking up speed with future commands and the modernization efforts. So don't miss that train. Get on that train.
Yeah, I'm just going to let the government guys kind of just close up on that same topic from what you guys think.
You guys done down there? Hey, I just wanted to...
And another thing.
I was going to make two comments, but seeing as that went 20 minutes, I'll just make one. I just want to echo the other transactional authority. I just want to make a comment. It's been around for a long time. It's just recently has seemed to come in vogue, and it's been pushed more heavily by congressional language. And it's an effective tool. But I would tell you to the question of what can industry and the government do better is I think what we cannot do is screw it up. So, you know, either by the actions of government or the actions of industry or collectively, if our actions drive that to become more regulated, more oversight, more bureaucracy because of either protests or complaints or the government abusing it and trying to get around processes to use it, we collectively will destroy this beautiful thing, which has allowed us and given us some freedom of maneuver on the front side of a lot of acquisition programs. You know, I'll say it openly because you know, I challenge them to fire me and put someone in my place. But I say 2 years before we collectively screw it up and OTAs become so overregulated that all the PMs are looking for a new vehicle. So I hope that again, we collectively can work together to maximize all of the benefits of an OTA and not introduce more bureaucracy to that, because again, we will waste a golden opportunity. And then I will just say lastly, just to echo what Ken said on the open architecture, I would say that there's again a recent resurgence, although many PMs try to always leverage COTS and GOTS, but this recent resurgence, the government, or more appropriately, I'll just speak for my portfolio, not just in soft training, but across test and cyber and instrumentation, EW, the whole basket that I work with. We are asking industry for more open architecture, more collaboration. Going out and buying a set of boots is easy, and certainly that's a very simple answer that COTS can offer. But trying to buy COTS when you're trying to do a multi-billion-dollar simulation enterprise with thousands of moving pieces is much more challenging. So again, we the government, or at least myself and my portfolio, appreciate the open collaboration and willingness to be more open architecture, more open to integration and collaboration. You know, we're in our organization are trying to set up more incubators using OTAs and some other authorities. So we do appreciate industry working with us on that.
Thank you. All right. Like I said, we had a few questions that we just wanted to get the thing started with. We have time. So we'll take any questions from the field here. Anybody we have? And I will just use the microphones here.
Mr. Abascal, you mentioned these new products for less. Could you elaborate on that, please? New products for less. Could you elaborate?
New products?
Yeah.
Oh, new products. Okay. So obviously the Army has everything they need to do the training that they have to do. So we have, when it comes to the export market, we have developed, they don't necessarily buy what the U.S. buys, especially in collective training systems. So we have worked with several foreign operators that have received, in particular, Apache helicopters. So those are the new products. Now, we started 10 years ago with what I would call an export version of the AFCAT. So on our own research and development or product development, we have developed new products. So we've been showing that. We love coming here because all the foreign operators are here. The Saudis were just in front of you just now. So their budgets are certainly different than the U.S. So we've been targeting that export market with these new products. Because the Army is not buying that. They won't be buying these new products probably until the STI. So part task trainers, that sort of thing, to offset. A good friend of mine said that back in the day, the simulators were a good alternative to the real aircraft. Now video games are a good alternative to the simulators. So these, multi-million-dollar simulators are costing now tens of thousands of dollars. So those are the new products. And they're part task trainers to offset the time that it takes to do the spending on, so the longbow crew trainer and those big operational flight simulators. So you can get the throughput now with 10 of these things and get the class through, so when they're spending the time on those big simulators that the Army has, it's more effective. And that translates to when they're running on the real live training exercises. So as a small company, we can focus on those part task trainers. So those are the new products I'm referring to. And then ideally, chasing that foreign market, along comes the STI. So we have this niche, so to speak, of the semi-immersive and the fully immersive products that we're getting some attention and actually can get the Army to take a look at it.
Hi there.
Hey, Jan.
Oh, sorry.
Can I just mention one thing? You talk about new products and new capabilities. One of the things with Lockheed Martin, obviously we acquired Sikorsky about a year ago. And what we're trying to do and what we're really focused on is bringing in some really good rotary wing capability into our training environment, if you will. I'm not sure it was completely resident previously, but now, like with our Prepared program, we're bringing in, I'm going to plug Prepared for a minute, but we're going to bring in, MH-60 Romeo and Sierra, the 53K for the Marine Corps side of the house. So I think you're going to see a big improvement in rotary wing training data when it comes to some of these environments for training. So just FYI.
All right, my question's for the Army guys. Networking together and security. I heard Robert talk about cybersecurity and how important that's going to be. Can I hear from the Army what you guys are thinking about? Because we're talking cloud, WAN, LAN connections, not just local area connections anymore. I'd like to hear your thoughts. Thank you.
So I can tell you one thing that we're looking at early in the process with the STI, because it's going to have a huge dependence on the network, right? Because the goal, again, as Robert was talking about, is moving the computing power up, right? And more virtual machines, cloud type scenarios. So So when you start talking about that, the demand on the network, so one of the things that the director is working closely is with the network CFT. So those are being worked together to solve that problem set, not just for the tactical network, but for the training network that's going to be needed to support, to ride on that network. So that's one way we're looking at that problem set from the CFT perspective, is trying to look at the cross-cutting dependencies among those CFTs. So I mentioned FVL earlier, and definitely the network.
I'll try to answer from two perspectives. From a soft aviation perspective, I will tell you, again, for the first time really ever, the regiment has expressed a desire to start connecting to entities outside of the compound, AFSOC, other organizations, other simulators. So that's something Al and his team are working on right now. The risk management framework, the new IA, and just the accreditation, ATO, and the assorted packages are becoming, they are the new contracts, right? I mean, whereas things are evolving now, it takes you 2 years to get a contract from tip to tail. Now it's looking like if you want to get anything complex through the entire cybersecurity and the accreditation gamut, you're really looking at 24 months. I'm not sure what's going to break, but I can tell you it's becoming almost untenable from a PM perspective that you can't start early enough. You almost have to start it before you even have a system, which is near impossible. And the amount of documentation and outside assistance required to get through it is just crushing. So that's something that I know, at least on the special operations side, we've raised to the CIO, G6, and other levels to try to find a way to navigate that. I'll speak from my other portfolio on cyber, as far as I know there's, again, a big drive for commercial cloud computing. We've looked at that from a cyber perspective on some of the training systems that I'm working on in PMITS. The cloud, the idea of a cloud itself as a noun, it works very well, and we're setting up a lot of private clouds and closed environments. However, commercial cloud is, it fits in some places, but I can tell you from a cyber training perspective, there's a lot of challenges that I don't think we've been able to resolve yet. I think industry at large is a little bit hesitant to allow the government to start introducing offensive malware and other types of things into their commercial cloud architecture. I'm not sure they're comfortable enough in their ability to firewall it off and to make sure it doesn't bleed over. There's also some inherent architectural issues with commercial cloud, again, looking at it more from a cyber training perspective, where it doesn't really set up subnets. There's some classification issues. So again, I know there's a lot of push and a lot of discussion on commercial cloud. I think it will be there one day. But I know in the interim, again, I won't speak for the entire Army or the military, but I know for my portfolio, we're having some challenges we have to overcome before the risk is sufficient that we can transition significant capability over to a commercial cloud architecture.
Yeah, and I would add to that. I mean, we're trying to accelerate some cloud experiments into the near term here in the near future. Specifically with Gelictic and the LVC, just to look at what we can actually accomplish via cloud for live or virtual constructive and gaming. So again, senior leadership knows and they understand that cloud is going to be a huge part of what we do in the future, and they are trying to locate the resources to accelerate that as much as possible so that we can have a really good idea of what the constraints are to us and some of the challenges as we move forward. And of course, cyber will certainly be a part of that once we move that direction.
Thank you, gentlemen. My name is Patsy Brown. I work for Quantitech. I'm up at the UH-60 TADS office. And my question for you is specifically, we're starting to see that there's a lack of standardization when it comes to your virtualization and your simulations. And one of our primary examples of that is we had 5 different models of the UH-60 engine, and none of them were the same. They were at a different scale. They didn't work well with one another. And as we're trying to pull more OEMs into working out of the same resource that belongs to the government, What are we doing at a command level that sets a standard that works not just for the PMO office and TADS, but also for PEO STRI and for TRADOC?
So I'll take an initial. Got it, that one. So not in the near term, but down the road, again, the goal of what we're trying to do within the STI is that open architecture that we could pull or plug in, whatever the capability is that we need. So in terms of a standardization, it's right in the architecture standards, the framework standards. But from, an individual simulation, a sub-simulation, if you will, right, that for that aircraft OFP or that aircraft, then we would work with the OEM, I would think, or with that other platform PM to use whatever their standard is. And again, with FVL, then we hope to solve that problem once and for all, where we're not, working multiple PMs. We got one standard that comes off of the platform product line that we just plug into the STI. So in the near term, it's still messy, I think, even as STI comes on, because that's something that Colonel Varnador deals with. It goes back to the concurrency thing, I think, is what you're getting at, right? So,
Yeah, so I would just say yes. You're exactly right. I was going to try to avoid this question, but then it occurred to me that I can't because I actually know a little bit about it now. So this topic has come up very recently, as you may have seen, and I can't recall the name of the memo, but it actually originated at a SOCOM. So Miss Lord actually just put out a memo and chartered a working group to start getting after modeling and simulation standards, because you're right, the more disparate we become, not only is it a challenge with the primes and the PMOs, but for any subs, for any members of industry, small or large, looking to invest their own capital, looking to try to get ahead of capability and integrate in the future, if you don't know what standard you're building to, it certainly creates a lot of challenges for you. So I can tell you we've had one meeting thus far. I somehow became the rep for STRI to sit in on that. On a microphone, on video, I won't tell you how that meeting went, but I'll meet you later for a beer and tell you how that meeting went. But it's going to be challenging because inevitably, not to be pessimistic, but inevitably the question always comes down to money. Even if we did set today one standard, the cost to try to drive everybody there and some of the other challenges associated with it usually make it, I don't want to say impossible, but it makes it very challenging. So, but I think you're absolutely right. Standard is a huge issue, and Miss Lord has challenged all the services, to include SOCOM, being service-like, to participate in that working group and try to find some common ground.
Hey, Jan, just a couple of quick sentences on that thing. Flexible requirements are a great thing in terms of speed and getting things out to the field, but they can also be a bad thing where you end up with 5 different, engine trainers and so forth. It may come down to something quite so simple as solid, hard, fast, driven from government configuration management, and that maybe that's going to solve some of that, where it's not just the Wild West of requirements generation and so forth. So I like flexible requirements because of the speed and the accuracy and the cost of getting them out to the field, but there might be a better way to do some of that with configuration management.
Of course, I've got to say something. So it's just the nature of the beast. Those 5 models were developed at different times, but they're out there. I've been around a long time, so I may have known the prior contractor, whereas the Army folks are coming in and out. They don't know, or even the PM office has the engineers don't even know they exist, but we do. I think it's incumbent on us to say that, hey, you're telling me to use this one, but there's 3 other ones. Let's do a small analysis of alternatives and see what the pros and cons, and get the best one going forward. So from that point on, that is the best model going forward, and those other ones kind of fall by the wayside. So I think that there's some incumbency on us just to make a phone call or 2 to help the customer out, point out what some of those alternatives are for them.
Mike Hickey with the Open Group FACE Consortium. We've heard a lot of common themes here, like standards, open architecture, speed, getting you capability faster, getting you capability that's tied into what's in the air. And there is a standard that exists. It's called the FACE Technical Standard, and it was developed by Army Aviation, PEO Aviation, AMERDEC, the Navy, the Air Force, and industry, 85 members. And it's actually been adopted by the Navy in some of their training systems. So my question is, are you aware of the FACE standard? And if not, how can we get you more information?
Yeah, say that again. What standard? Say that again.
Future Airborne Capability Environment, FACE Technical Standard. And we've had some engineers from PO STRI attend some meetings, and they've been getting briefed by their PO Aviation counterparts, but we'd love to give you this standard to use. It's free of use, and it's of great value to you.
Ladies and gentlemen, if I have your attention, please. The exhibit hall will be closing in 10 minutes. Our exhibit hall will be closing promptly in 10 minutes and will reopen tomorrow morning at 11:30. We'll see you at the Hall of Fame induction banquet this evening.
Just real quick on the FACE, we have briefed, when I was at PO STRI too, we had a team that briefed FACE. So I know that the certain PMs were aware of it. They were having it at the working groups, but I know they didn't take it on, that I remember, as a standard for PO STRI, but there was a team for a while being worked up at PM Trade that was working on the FACE from the live part, because really it was the live part tying in some of the sensors and stuff where FACE is really, has its better capability. So there's one gentleman here, he's been waiting.
Good afternoon, Bob Vaughn from Flight Safety International, and perhaps this is for Colonel Farrell, but we've been looking at how we can use mixed and augmented reality training devices for initial pilot training, both fixed wing and rotary wing. And I was wondering if has you and your staff looked at those opportunities, and what kind of training tasks do you see that would be applicable to those kind of technologies?
Okay, so that's a great question, and the last part was probably the most important. It's about the training tasks that you're trying to achieve and to what level of proficiency you want to train it to. Okay, so all simulators have their own purpose, and they're designed to train specific tasks or a broad range of tasks. So the level of fidelity you need varies depending on what level of proficiency you're going to achieve there. So we are looking at some of the mixed reality, augmented reality type capabilities. Matter of fact, a lot of the STE capabilities that we were looking at down in Orlando last month, we're using some of the new off-the-shelf, the Oculus type systems, VR headsets. I know that we're looking at that from flight training to the collective training environment, because a lot of the things, when you look at things like the AVCAT and the big flight safety simulators, you got a full cockpit, every button, every switch, every display. Well, you don't need every button, every switch, every display, every circuit breaker to train certain tasks. So you can virtualize a lot of that stuff in a virtual environment and only turn on and off those functional fidelity requirements you need to get done. But one of the challenges are, when it comes to flying an aircraft, there's some muscle memory involved, right? There's tactile, physical, you have to manipulate controls, it has to feel right. And if it doesn't feel right, you get distracted by that. And you're not actually getting at those higher cognitive functions of managing the aircraft because you're too distracted trying to fly an aircraft that's not flying the way you expect it to fly. So there is some fidelity requirements for the flight modeling that has to go into it. And there has to be some physical touching of controls and buttons and switches. If you've been in the front seat of an Apache, there's 30 buttons and switches per hand, that you gotta memorize by shape, feel, and how it works. So it's very complicated. But we are looking at those technologies. We're trying to bring those into my center, so when I bring aviation leaders in, we kind of get their feedback. Hey, what do you think? Would you be able to do these tasks with this system? And we're looking at virtual maintenance training as well. We can immerse a guy in a aircraft and looking at components of engines and boxes and learn how to do maintenance in a virtual environment. You can rehearse a maintenance task before you ever touch the airplane. And that way you minimize the time that the airplane's actually down for maintenance for that particular task. So there's different tasks, different simulators, different purposes. As I mentioned before, so a flight simulator needs to have much higher fidelity to learn those in the motion side, right? To understand how an aircraft's going to behave and act when you manipulate controls. In a collective environment, you don't need that so much. In a collective environment, you probably don't need all those individual emergency procedures, switches and buttons, knobs, etc. So, but yeah, we are looking at that. Matter of fact, the AVCAT itself uses a mixed reality type of headset. So it has like a virtual reality immersed, but you can see through it, so you can see your cockpit, see your gauges. So that is like a mixed reality headset that we're already using with our current capability. We're just looking at making that better.
Real quickly, and he made a great point. Depending on the training requirement, you don't have to build out every flight characteristic that is possible to have in the simulation. If you're going to train, radios or something, you don't need all that. You just need to focus maybe on, radio avionics training. Perfect's kind of the enemy of good enough, and I think if we try to do too much and deliver too much, first of all, it's going to take forever, but, I think we can deliver something to the field where they'll gain from it, utilize it, and probably utilize it more, and obviously save a lot of money, time, and cost. So, for the industry.
I think we came right to our time, which was perfect. So I want to thank the panel and thank the audience for some great questions. And I think this is one of the first years we've really done the modeling and simulation training thing. And hopefully, we can get a good rapport and keep this part of our track maybe in the future years. So again, thank you, gentlemen, and let's give them a round of applause for a great panel here. And I know most of them will be around here for the rest of the week. I think all you guys are. So see them on the floor. So again, thanks again.